Ever feel like, you're just stuck, like you're on this path, and everyone expects you to just keep going, even if it doesn't feel right?
I think we all have those moments, right, where we start to question things, maybe even disagree with the people we're closest to.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. But what happens when that disagreement goes deeper? Like when it challenges everything you thought you knew about your friends, your family, even your whole country?
That's some heady stuff.
It is, and that's actually what we're diving into today.
Yeah.
Stories of people who made the really tough choice to stand up to their own in-groups, kind of like going against the grain. And we're going to look at, what happened because of it.
It's a fascinating thing, right? Because on the one hand, these groups, they give us this sense of belonging, like we're part of something bigger.
Mm.
But they can also be these echo chambers where everyone's just reinforcing the same beliefs, even when they're, well, kind of harmful.
Oh, totally. It's easy to get caught up in that. So, okay, let's go back in time for a sec. Back to 1943, Nazi Germany.
Ooh, okay.
Imagine you're a student at the University of Munich, just trying to live your life, right? War's going on, there's propaganda everywhere. And suddenly you see these pamphlets raining down from a balcony, like literally disrupting everything. What would you do?
Talk about a statement.
Right. So these pamphlets, they were the work of this group called the White Rose.
Ah, the White Rose, yeah.
Yeah.
Led by a brother and sister, Hans and Sophie School.
And Sophie's story is really interesting because, get this, she started out as like a model member of the Hitler Youth.
Ah.
Totally bought into the whole Nazi ideology.
Oh, really?
Yeah, talk about a 180. So she's basically, drinking the Kool-Aid. But then something happens. What was it?
Well, it was a pretty personal experience that changed everything for her. Her brother, Hans, he got arrested by the Gestapo.
Oh, no. What for?
For being gay.
Wow. That must have been a huge wake-up call for her. I mean, it's one thing to believe in an ideology, but when it directly impacts someone you love.
You see the real consequences.
Exactly. And that's exactly what happened to Sophie. It shattered this perfect image she had of the Nazi regime. Suddenly, she sees it for what it really is.
Yeah.
Oppressive.
You can almost imagine, right? Like her whole world just shifted.
Totally. So how does this, former Hitler Youth enthusiast become a resistance fighter? I mean, joining a group like the White Rose in Nazi Germany, that's got to be super risky.
Oh, incredibly risky. Even getting the supplies they needed, like paper and ink, that was a challenge. And actually distributing the pamphlets. I mean, you could get arrested, imprisoned, even killed.
So she was putting her life on the line.
She was, but she felt like she had to do something. Like staying silent would mean she was part of the problem.
I can only imagine, like, her and her brother and their friends huddled up somewhere, secretly typing out these pamphlets. So what were they writing about? Like, what message were they trying to get out?
Well, they were directly challenging the Nazi regime, calling out all the horrible things they were doing and urging people to resist. And they didn't sugarcoat anything. They talked about the most horrific crime against human dignity, talking about the persecution of the Jews.
Wow, powerful words.
And they wanted their fellow Germans to, as they put it, become the bad conscience of the nation.
The bad conscience of the nation? Wow, that's a heavy image. They weren't just dissenting, they were trying to wake people up.
Absolutely. And they knew it was dangerous. Sophie even wrote letters to her boyfriend, who was actually a soldier fighting for the Nazis.
No way.
Yeah, and in those letters, she asked him to send her envelopes and stamps, knowing that if those letters were discovered...
She could be in big trouble.
Exactly.
That's incredible. She was willing to risk everything, even her relationship, for what she believed in.
It really shows how strongly she felt about it. And you can see how her thinking changed over time in those letters. Like she's wrestling with her past, trying to understand how she could have believed what she did before.
So it's like she's shedding her old self, right?
Yeah.
Becoming this new person, a person of conscience, someone who's willing to question everything.
Yeah, exactly. And all of this leads to this incredible act of defiance at the University of Munich. Sophie and Hans decide to distribute their sixth pamphlet. But they don't just leave them in classrooms.
Oh, they do.
They throw them from a balcony.
From a balcony.
Scattering them all over the atrium.
Like confetti.
It's almost poetic in a way. Their words literally raining down on everyone below, disrupting the whole order of things.
That's intense.
It was. And of course, it came with a price.
I bet.
They were spotted by a janitor, a big supporter of the Nazis, and he immediately reported them to the Gestapo.
Oh, no.
They were arrested right away. The trial was basically a sham, and they were executed just days later.
I mean, it's chilling, right? To think that they were so committed to what they believed in that they were willing to face death. What do you think goes through someone's mind in those final moments?
It's hard to imagine, but we actually have some insight into Sophie's final moments. The night before she was executed, she wrote a letter to a friend, and in it she talks about listening to music. Schubert's Trout Quintet.
Really?
Yeah, it's this really beautiful piece.
Wow, so like beauty and death all mixed together.
Yeah, it's pretty powerful. And it reminds us that these weren't just like names in a history book. They were real people with hopes and dreams and passions just like us.
Absolutely. And even though they were executed, the White Rose didn't just disappear, right?
No, not at all. Their pamphlets, the ones they risked everything to distribute, they were actually airdropped over Germany by Allied planes later in the war.
So their message spread even further.
Exactly, which kind of shows you, even in the face of tyranny, ideas can still get out there.
It's like a little bit of hope, right? Even when things seem really dark.
Yeah, definitely. So I guess it makes you wonder, what happens when the challenge comes not from, a small group like the White Rose, but from someone who's actually part of the establishment, someone who everyone sees as a symbol of unity.
You're talking about Martin Luther King Jr., right?
Exactly. I mean, think about it. He was the face of the civil rights movement, and then he starts speaking out against the Vietnam War.
Yeah, that was a big deal. I bet that alienated some of his supporters.
Oh, absolutely. Some people thought it was a distraction from the fight for racial equality. Others felt like he was being too radical.
And I'm guessing the FBI wasn't too happy about it either?
Oh, no, not at all. The FBI, under J. Edgar Hoover, they saw King as a real threat. I mean, they even called him the most dangerous man in America after his I Have a Dream speech.
Seriously. The man who preached nonviolence.
Yeah, I know, it's crazy. But it shows you how much resistance there was to change.
And the FBI didn't just, keep an eye on him, did they?
Yeah.
They did some pretty messed up stuff, right?
Yeah, they were constantly surveilling him. They tapped his phones, spread rumors about him, even tried to blackmail him with recordings from his personal life.
That's just awful.
It was. And it's kind of a reminder that power can be used in really terrible ways.
Especially when people are afraid of change.
Right. So, knowing all of this, I mean, did King ever back down from his stance on the Vietnam War?
I wouldn't think so. He seemed pretty committed to what he believed in.
He was. In fact, he became even more outspoken. In 1967, he gave this speech called Beyond Vietnam, and in it, he basically condemned American militarism.
Oh. I mean, wasn't that a super controversial move?
Oh, yeah. Even some of his allies criticized him for it. I think the media really went after him, too.
That must have been really hard. It's one thing to stand up to people who disagree with you, but to have your own side turn on you.
Yeah, it takes real courage to do that, to risk losing the support of the people who are supposed to be on your side.
So do you think King knew, how much this would cost him? I mean, the isolation, the criticism, the threats.
It's hard to say for sure, but we do have some clues. Some of his private phone conversations were recorded, and you can hear the toll it was taking on him, his frustration, his sadness, the moments of doubt.
Man, it must have been incredibly lonely at times to carry that weight, to face all that opposition.
It must have been. But through it all, his conviction never wavered. He knew the risks, but he felt like he had to speak out against injustice no matter what.
So in a way, he was moving beyond just civil rights.
Yeah.
Right? Like he was embracing a much bigger vision of social justice.
Yeah, I think you're right. He saw the connections between racial injustice, poverty, and war, and he was willing to fight against all of it.
And, his willingness to speak out, even when it was unpopular, I think it really helped the anti-war movement gain momentum, especially among young people.
Absolutely. He gave a voice to the people who were already opposed to the war, and his moral authority, it lent legitimacy to the movement.
So it's like, even though he was facing so much opposition, he was still able to make a difference.
He was. And it's a powerful reminder that sometimes the most important thing is to stand up for what you believe in, even when it's hard.
I mean, it's crazy, right? This guy, this unknown man standing up to tanks, becomes this global symbol of resistance. It's like, even against all that power, one person can still make a difference.
It's amazing, isn't it? And the photo, that photo of Tank Man, it went everywhere. Everyone saw it. Didn't even matter what language you spoke or where you came from. Everyone understood what it meant. It became a symbol of fighting for freedom, fighting for what's right.
It really shows you the power of a single image.
For sure.
And all these stories we've been talking about, Sophie's Skull, Martin Luther King Jr., Tank Man, they all show that courage can look like a lot of different things.
It's not just one thing, right?
Yeah. It could be a group of students handing out pamphlets, a civil rights leader speaking out against war, a guy standing in front of a tank.
Exactly. But what ties all these stories together, I think, is this willingness to challenge how things are, to say, this isn't right, even when it means going against the people you're closest to.
Makes you think, right? It's like, have I ever stayed silent when I knew something was wrong? Have I just gone along with the crowd?
I think we've all been there, haven't we? It's natural, wanting to fit in, wanting to avoid conflict. But sometimes the bravest thing you can do is actually speak up. To be that, what was it, Sophie Scholl said, that bad conscience.
Yeah, the bad
Yeah.
conscience. So we've heard some pretty incredible stories today. Sophie Scholl, Martin Luther King Jr., Tank Man. What do you think people should take away from all this? What can we learn from them?
Well, I think more than anything, their stories show us that we all have the potential to make a difference, to change things for the better. And it doesn't have to be some huge dramatic thing.
It's the little things too, right?
Yeah, like just speaking up when you see something that's not right. Even if it makes you uncomfortable, even if it means disagreeing with the people around you.
Because if we stay silent, we're basically saying it's okay.
Right. And all those small acts of courage, they can add up to something much bigger. They can create real change.
So next time you're in a situation where you have to decide, do I speak up or do I stay quiet?
Yes.
Remember these people, Sophie Scholl, Martin Luther King Jr., Tank Man, remember what they did?
They showed us that even when things are really bad, even when it seems like nothing can change, there's always hope.
And you never know, maybe someday someone will be telling our stories, the stories of how we stood up for what we believed in.
How we made a difference.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's all the time we have for today. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
It's been a pleasure.
We'll be back next time with more stories and ideas that, get you thinking, get you questioning things. Until then, keep asking questions, keep learning, and keep speaking your truth.